Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 15th of October. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with Kherson district, with this area. If you remember, yesterday we discussed the offensive operation in this area, that the Ukrainian plans in this area and so on. And this morning the Ukrainians started some kind of artillery preparation. They were shelling this area heavily with all types of artillery weapon they have. They start somewhere at 5 a.m. of local time, and somewhere at 10 a.m. of local time they started their counter-offensive operation all along the front line between the town by the name of Duchany, the south area in this town, and the front line finished somewhere in the town by the name of Sadok, Shaslivo, in this area. So the Ukrainians were trying to penetrate this defense by attacking all along the front line. And but the thing is that if we take a look at the weather map, you're gonna see that it's the rainy weather in this area, so it's not very easy to attack in this area using tanks, and the fields is not very nice for. If we're talking about tanks, they don't care about this, but if we're talking about vehicles, it's not a very nice solution for them to cross the fields during this weather. But anyway, the Russians reported that there were around 2 tactical battalion groups from the Ukrainian side. There were around 25 tanks involved in this operation and a lot of infantry. There was a little bit panic updates from the Russian sources because, as we discussed yesterday, they were expecting this attack during these days. But somewhere at 5 p.m. of local time, the Russians reported that Ukrainian attack, that they were completely defeated in this area. They lost a lot of armored vehicles, a lot of tanks, and now the Russians are trying to calculate the losses among the infantry of the Ukrainian side, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back. And of course the Russians are very happy because as we discussed, they were expected this offensive operation. We discussed about the evacuation of Kherson area and so on. But the thing is, and I think we need to discuss, and I think I need to tell you about this. Yes, the Ukrainians used around 2 tactical battalion groups. Few thousands of soldiers were involved in this offensive operation, some kind of tank campaign and so on, and the losses are very high. But you need to understand one important thing, that it wasn't a real attack from the Ukrainian side. At least it's my opinion, it's my understanding of the situation. I believe that Ukrainians were doing some kind of imitation of attack with one purpose. The Russians were so scared. I can't say that they were so scared. They were so stressed with all these losses in Kharkiv region. They were so stressed with all these attacks. There is a new commander of Russian forces in special military operations, so everybody was stressed and everybody was under pressure of an idea that they might lose the Kherson bridgehead. So of course they prepared very nice, and they knew and they still know that the Ukrainians will try to do counter-offensive operation. They were prepared, and when they saw such a big number of Ukrainian forces who were involved in this counter-offensive operation this morning, they believed that that was the real offensive operation. I can't tell you for 100% did the Russians used all their artillery to stop this offensive operation, and I hope they didn't, because as I understand, the Ukrainians did some kind of imitation with one purpose. With one purpose, they wanted to spot and wanted to find out the Russians' artillery positions. Their artillery position that they're going to use if the Ukrainian starts the real offensive operation. I can't tell you if they spotted everything they need. I can't tell you if the Russians used the entire artillery armies they have in this region. Maybe they used just like a few positions, few groups in this area and so on. But anyway, I believe that Ukrainians got all necessary information, or at least some necessary information they need. And now they know where the Russian artillery positions, because the Russians started, as you can see according to this map, you see there is a lot of icons of artillery bombing and shelling. That means that the Russians did really use a lot of artillery systems, so that's why they shown their positions. And this is exactly what the Ukrainians needed, because it's highly unlikely that the Ukrainians will start any offensive operation in this area without knowing where the Russians' artillery systems are located. Now I believe they got some information. The Russians reported that today there was this attack, but in the previous 24 hours, the real losses of today's offensive operation we're going to see tomorrow in tomorrow's report of Ministry of Defense. But if you are talking about the previous 24 hours before that counter-offensive operation, the Russians reported that as a result of Ukrainian offensive operation in this area, they lost around 120 soldiers, 25 armored vehicles, and the Russians destroyed around 5 pontoon bridges in Andreevka Bilogorka bridgehead in this area near Davidbrody. Furthermore, very interesting updates are coming from the town by the name of Osokrovka, this town. If you take a look at the Russian sources map, there is like two important icons in this area. One icon is around Osokrovka, this town, another one like on the area on the north from Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. The Ukrainians were trying to cross the river. They prepared some marines, and maybe that was also a part of imitation of attack, trying to understand where the Russians' artillery systems. But anyway, as a result of that failed attack, the Ukrainian lost around 30 soldiers and around 7 boats. No, more, 50 soldiers. The Ukraine lost around 50 Marines who were involved in this operation, around 9 armored vehicles, including tanks and armored vehicles, and something around 7 boats that Ukrainians, of different types, boats that Ukrainians were planning to use to cross the river and to establish the bridgehead on this side of the Dnieper River. So anyway, I believe that Ukrainians got some information after today's clashes, and now they know where to attack during the upcoming ground offensive operation in Kherson district. If we're talking one more thing about Kherson offensive operation, of course, the best solution for the Ukrainians is to split this operation in 2 parts. And the first one, to clear everything on, let's say, this is the river, Ingulets River, this one. So, of course, the best plan, the best solution, the best result that Ukrainians are able to achieve, first of all, to clear everything that located on the east side of Ingulets River, so this area where today they made another attempt of counter-offensive operation, and after that they will be able to start offensive operation or storm the Kherson town. So we'll see. I believe that next week we are going to see something more in this area. Now let's move to other front lines, and as you can see, there are some icons near Zaporozhye. Mainly the Russians were attacking this area using the rockets, using their Iskander rockets and so on. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, they destroyed with their drones two S-300 systems. I believe maybe many of you saw the videos how the Russians were using the kamikaze drones, and they destroyed these S-300 systems, which main goal and purpose of using to shut down such drones, but they were destroyed by drones. Very interesting situation. And another attack was against the Ukrainians who were located in Zaporozhye. And if we're talking about Zaporozhye, the Ukrainians lost around 160 soldiers in this area. It was the soldiers who belonged to 65th Mechanized Brigade. That was their position where they have some rest or sleep or something like this. If we are talking about Ugledar front line, the front line is stable, no movements from both sides. If we're talking about Donetsk, the same situation. The Russians very slowly, step by step, are pushing in direction of Nivolskaya, are trying to clear Pervomayskaya. And if we're talking about Nivolskaya, we can say that there are just maybe 2 trenches or 3 fortifications left behind this town. The Russians now are trying to clear this fortification. As you can see, they are very far from their land, from their territory, and they're very close to the town by the name of Nivolskaya. And now they are able to do this for many reasons. One important one is that Pervomayskaya is maybe cleared for more than 60-80%. This map is not updated, but there were a lot of video about this situation. And if we take a look at this map, you're gonna see that this is our Nivolskaya. this one. The road that connects Nivolska was cut by the Russians maybe this week or the week ago, week before. So for now, it's not so easy to support and supply this area, and I believe that sooner or later the Ukrainians will be forced to leave this area just to avoid the unnecessary losses from their side. If we're talking about Avdiivka, the situation is stable. The Ukrainians are still there. They can support this area, and they're shelling town Donetsk as they did it before. As you can see, there are a lot of icons of shelling this town. There were updates that some civilians were killed during this shelling, so the situation is still critical for this town. Slowly, step by step, this town is reducing till ruins. And now let's move to the north, and now we are moving to Bakhmut front line. Today there were no updates from Bakhmut, I believe, but I think that the only update that the Russian sources map has been updated, as you can see. Yesterday, if you saw this map, the green line was right on the north of Veselaya Dolina, this way, in this area, but now, as you can see, the Russians developed their bridgehead in this area. Now Ivangrad, this town, is under Russian control. I believe that tomorrow this area will be colored in red. And as you can see now, the Russians are storming Bakhmut from many sides, but from today we didn't have any updates. I believe that the Ukrainians moved some reserves in this area, trying to stop the penetration and collapsing on the front line. So that means that we are going to see a real storm and real clashes in this town. Now we are moving to Liman, Kupiansk front line. There are also some icons in this area. The Ukrainians the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours there were no active clashes, active actions from the Ukrainians on the Kupiansk front line. There was irregular things like rotation, moving supplies, support, ammunition, shell, and the Russians were attacking the Ukrainians during this process. And the Russians reported that, if we're talking about town Beistavoye, this one, and the Russians killed around 50 soldiers, 10 armored vehicles, and they destroyed a small ammo depot in this area. And maybe the Ukrainians were planning to use this depot as a frontline depot for upcoming offensive operation in direction of Svatov. But for now, this area was under attack, and the Ukrainians had losses in this area. Also, the Ukrainians were trying to cross the river near Dvurechne in this area, and the Russians attacked this area. And during the crossing process, the Ukraine lost around 30 soldiers and 6 armored vehicles. And as usual, the same situation near Liman bridgehead. There are very heavy clashes around Torskaya. Every day we got more and more updates. So one day the Russians are saying that they control Terny, another day they're saying that they entered Torskaya, another day we receive update that the Russians shelled Torsk. So these towns in the grain zone, and there are very heavy clashes there. There are no real bridges that Ukrainians are able to use to move armored heavy tanks and armored vehicles on this side of the Zhiribets River. From the other side, the Russians do have possibility to move tanks on the front line to attack this area with artillery. So for the Russians, it's much more easier to fight in this area than for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have a lot of losses in this area, and the Russians reported that as a result of heavy clashes on Liman front line all along the Zhiribets River, the Ukraine lost around 60 soldiers and 9 armored vehicles. And that's it about the front lines. And now we're talking about Belgorod. Today the Ukrainians were trying to get Belgorod with rockets, trying to attack this town with every type of weapon they have. And there was a report that they attacked using the M77 howitzers. They attacked the small town Oktyabrski. There was ammo depot of the Russian military. And they got this depot destroyed, and a few soldiers from the Russian side were killed during this attack. Furthermore, today we got update that the Ukrainians, using the HIMARS, using the .U rockets, were trying to attack Belgorod, and they managed to destroy the oil depot in this town in Belgorod. Furthermore, the previous night, they destroyed some energy facility in this town. So the situation is not very good for the civilians in this town, but we understand that Ukrainians, at least they want to revenge for the attacks that the Russians do all along the territory of Ukraine. If we're talking about Kiev, today during the previous 24 hours, the Russians got some energy facilities in this town, and there is a very accurate icon. There is a energy facility on the south of Kiev, and they got this facility. And today in the evening we got report from the Ukrainian channels that they are planning to shut down for a few hours the electricity in the entire town. This about Ukraine. Another important update are coming from Belarus. As you know, the president of Belarus reported or announced about the anti-terrorist operation in this area, that the level of terrorist it's a very dangerous situation with this terrorist anti-terrorist situation. And furthermore, later he reported about creating powerful military group on the territory of Belarus. He told us that mainly this group will be consist of the civil citizens of Belarus. But anyway, we got a lot of videos and updates from the territory of Belarus. As you can see, there is an icon about that a lot of convoys with the Russian soldiers arrived in the south of Belarus, in this area. And if we're talking about the Ukrainians, their intelligence are saying that maybe the next year, in March, as it was in the 2022, in the beginning of this year, maybe the Russians from Belarus are planning to repeat another offensive operation. But for now, we don't know. Nobody knows exactly where exactly the Russians are planning to attack. And if you remember, my projection was a few videos ago that maybe the Russians will try to attack Chernigov one more time and Sumy region, and they will try to establish control over this territory, over the north of Ukraine. There are like at least few reasons to do this. The first one is that they will be able to cut the railroad between Kiev and Kharkiv, and there's going to be just one railroad. This one, the north one, will be cut off. This is the first reason. The second reason is that there are a lot of energy power lines moving on the north of in the Chernigov and Sumy region, and if the Russians are able to cut off these power lines, that means that Ukrainians will be able to supply and support Kharkiv with electricity that moves through Zaporozhye, Dnieper. So it's not very good. We understand that if it's not a big deal for the Russians, let's say from the south of Ukraine, to shut down the energy facilities in this area, and then the entire Kharkiv and the east part of Ukraine will be without electricity, and the Ukrainians won't be able to have any possibilities to restore the electricity and energy supply of the east of Ukraine. And the third reason why the Russians may try to attack in this direction is that from this area they will be able to start shelling and attacking Kiev one more time, with one purpose, as we discussed, to force Zelensky to start negotiation. Because, as I understand, it's my personal opinion, the Russians want to stop this special operation. They want to stop the violence. They want to stop everything. They don't want to return these territories like Crimea, like Kherson, Zaporozhye, LPR, DPR. They don't want to return this area. They want the Ukrainians to sign all necessary papers, and they want the Ukrainians to recognize this territory as a part of Russian Federation. They want to stop. They are tired of this situation, and the Ukrainians also tired, but the Ukrainians don't want to give up because they still have support and supply from the Western countries, and the most important, the Western countries don't want to stop this situation, and they want to continue fighting with the Russians. And of course, the Russians from Belarus can attack in the west side of Ukraine, in this area. In this direction, of course, they may. The thing they can do is to at least to cut one supply road, railroad that moves from Poland to Kiev. This one, at least they can take control over this area. And maybe they may try to establish control over Rovinska nuclear power plant that's located in Rovno region, so in this area. So maybe this is the and maybe if we're talking about the strategic perspective, of course, if the Russians want to ruin Ukraine step by step and not like to ruin at the same time and to force them to sign the papers, of course, for them, it's better to start with the west part, because in this case, they will be able at least take control over Rovinska nuclear power plant. And after that, the Ukrainians will still have just two power plants, one located in Vinnytsia region and another one in Nikolaev, South Ukrainian nuclear power plant. And as you can see, the South Ukrainian power plant located very close very close to the front line. This is it. So maybe the Russians will try to take control over this power plant as a result of counter-offensive operation against the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation that we might see in the next few weeks or few days. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.